So, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission and the Ephrata Cloister Associates, welcome to September's Ephrata Virtual Academy. My name is Elizabeth Berthod, and I am the Historic Site Administrator at Ephrata Cloister. For those who may be joining us for the first time and not familiar with Ephrata, this community was founded in 1732 by German immigrant Conrad Beissel and consisted of celibate members as well as married members and their families. Education was always important at Ephrata, and as early as 1742, Brother Obed conducted classes for the children of the married members, and later the community constructed the Ephrata Academy on our site, which became a public school. And speaking of the Ephrata Academy, tonight's presentation by our museum educator, Michael Showalter, will focus on just that, the Ephrata Academy. So it's September, so sit back and enjoy as Michael takes us all back to school.
We're going to talk about education at Ephrata and the academy. I wanted to start really pre-academy to talk a little bit about education and its role in life, not just at Ephrata, but in the religious ideas that informed the Ephrata community. Ephrata grew out of something called Pietism, which was a movement in 17th century Germany. The ideas spread throughout Europe and into England. That idea of a very personal relationship with God. And because of that, education became a very much of a focus in Pietist life. And you see that need to be able to read the Bible and other devotional literature and create some of that literature on your own as a real focus for education in Pietist circles. That, of course, expands out into other Christian religions. And you see that many of early America's churches are also the sponsors of schools. You see that certainly within the Quaker tradition. You see that in the Mennonite tradition with the famous Mennonite teacher, Christopher Dock, and that's carrying right through to Ephrata. Conrad Beissel, Ephrata's founder, who came to Pennsylvania in 1720, had spent a short time in Germantown, but by 1721 was living in the Conestoga area in the northeastern corner of Lancaster County. And while there, he taught children and taught school. By the 1780s, there was still a sister living in the sister's house who remembered attending his school in the Conestoga region when he taught. We can't say just exactly how school began at Ephrata. We do know that by 1739, the community decided to build what's described as both a prayer and schoolhouse on Mount Zion. That building does not stand, but here's an image of some archaeology that was going on at that site in the early 2000s. We really don't have a clear understanding of the structure itself, but that idea that a schoolhouse was included as part of that worship building is a tradition that continued through the Revolutionary War of the 1770s. By 1777-78, those buildings were being used as a military hospital. That same winter, Washington's at Valley Forge. And the tradition is that the school had to end because of the hospital taking over the structures. By that time, the teacher is probably Brother Obed. His name is Ludwig Hocker. Ludwig Hocker comes to Ephrata in 1739, but we can't put an exact date on when he starts teaching. He comes in 39. We do know by 1748, there is a student who is sent to both live at Ephrata and be taught at Ephrata. So sometime in the 1740s, we're starting to teach school. Brother Obed gets that recognition as the school teacher, so much so that by 1780s, he publishes his own school book. And this is the book said to be the second edition, no first editions known. You see down here, LH, that's Ludwig Hocker. That's Brother Obed. And he actually identifies himself as both the printer and the teacher here on his school book. We have translated this school book, and it is still available for sale in our museum store. So I just got to put in a little plug there for us all. Another kind of education that was going on at Ephrata by the late 1740s is apprenticeship. Now, this particular apprenticeship document does not have a connection to Ephrata, except that we now believe it may have been printed on the printing press at Ephrata. It is from the area. It is from 1768. And we do know at that point there are some young boys working in the print shop as well as apprentices. So we've got all kinds of educational opportunities here in the 18th century. Brother Obed died in 1792, and it's not clear who may have carried on that educational tradition after his death. The last of Ephrata's celibate members died in 1813, and the next year, the remaining married members formed the German Seventh-day Baptist Church. I bring this up because 2 years later, after actually just a year or so after they get their formal incorporation papers, they publish a long, almost a full column and a half in the newspaper saying that they are committed to education and they are going to establish a school for the children of the neighborhood. And I want to read just a little bit of that to you. It says in one portion of that article, quote, "The public and particularly the inhabitants of and near Ephrata are respectfully informed that the trustees of Ephrata," that's the leaders of the church, "have since the 12th of September, 1814, that's when this is done, since the 12th of September, established a school in which both the English and German languages are taught, with such other branches of useful knowledge as are necessarily required in the common life, such as reading and writing and ciphering." I want to really stress this right at the start. They're teaching in both English and German, an unusual situation, especially considering where we are in the countryside. I'll come back to this to explain why this is really strange and important, but keep that idea in mind. Where was that early school being held? Well, there are not clear sources, but one source is a student in the first class in the academy when that fancy building opened in 1830s, who describes the earlier building he says was at the site, probably located near the brother's house. He describes it this way: small frame or log structure, 1 story high, with plank desks and benches. In comfort and aesthetic, they were entirely disregarded. So I often use this picture when I'm talking with school children about what that very earliest school may look like. This, as you might notice at the bottom, is from Tennessee. It's not our school building, but it is a log school building, pretty plain, not really much in amenities here in this schoolhouse. And I can kind of suspect that our early school may have looked something like this. The teacher, the last teacher who's teaching in our log schoolhouse at Ephrata, is a man named Christian Lichtenthaler. He's teaching there in the spring of 1837, but over the summer he gets married, and in the fall he gets to be the first teacher in the brand new Ephrata Academy. This is an old photograph. I can't give you an exact date. It's probably not 1837 when the building opened, a little years after that. But here's the academy, right by the main road, what's now our main street. So if you come to visit, you can't miss it as you come in the driveway. And I will say that many people drive past and who don't stop to visit are under the impression that it might be a church with that steeple. Visitors who come to the site ask us, is that a church over there? But no, it is the schoolhouse. And again, George Barr, that early student, is a student in the first class in this schoolhouse. Let me tell you how he describes this new schoolhouse. He says this 1837 building is, quote, a well-built, handsome, new two-story frame school building surmounted by a steeple and clock, nicely painted and well furnished with comfortable seats and desks. A fine yard enclosed by a stone wall in front and a nice board fence in rear surrounding the building, with decent-looking water closet of brick with separate apartments for the sexes, which stood in the rear. A nice board walkway ran from the academy to the teacher's residence. And last but not least, the beautiful grove close by, whose cooling shades the school could deport itself to in the warm weather. During archaeology, we probably have found that brick privy that was to the back of the building, and it's a little different position where our reconstructed privy is located. It's a little further down the driveway, as I recall. And that board sidewalk that goes to the teacher's house, well, that's a building that stands next to the cemetery today, and we interpret as the Weaver's house. The entrance that we all enter the property with today did not exist in the 18th century or the 19th century. And so you can see that vast expanse of ground and that goes behind the building. Great playground. One of the last members of the church told me that one of their favorite games, and I must say I don't quite understand this one, but one of the favorite games was to divide the students in half. Half would go to the front yard and half would go to the backyard, and they would throw a ball over the roof. Now, I'm guessing maybe a baseball, but you had to try and catch it on the other side. So lots of activity going on outside in this school. George Barr mentions a clock on this beautiful schoolhouse. And in fact, here's the sign. This is a reproduction of the original sign that identifies the building as the Ephrata Academy, founded AD 1837, founded by the Society of Seventh-day Baptists. And that's the name of the church at the cloister, Seventh-day German Baptist. And so we're still continuing in that idea of school-sponsored churches. And here's one of the two clock dials. These were created in 1841 by a worker from Lidditz, an artist and part-time teacher. He actually taught in Lincoln previously. His name is William Hall, and he painted these two dials. We still have these in our collection at the Ephrata Cloister. And yes, there is only one hand as the original clock. The actual mechanism for the clock that operated this steeple clock was first created in 1735 and mounted in a different Ephrata Cloister building, but it had only one hand. So you guess the minutes between the hours. This is our modern interpretation of the inside of the schoolhouse. The school went through a couple different uses, and I'll talk about near the end of our time together about some of those other uses other than a schoolhouse. So this is our modern interpretation, but there's a few bits of original material here. One is that desk, said to be the original teacher's desk. Another, a set of 4 chairs. There are 4 matching chairs like this. And we have a note in the church's account book from 1838, where Aaron Traeger is paid for making chairs for the schoolhouse. And for 4 chairs, and there could have been more, he gets $27.50. We've got a clock in the front of the room, original to this schoolhouse. I can't say if original means 1837 or maybe a little bit after. And most recently, we've acquired this desk, this school desk, We do not know that it's original to the building, but what we can say is that in the 1930s and 40s, actually the early 40s, there were some oral histories done with elderly people in the neighborhood, and 2 or 3 of them report that the school desks were plain simple on square legs, and had lids that lifted up. And I don't have the picture of the open lid here, but you can kind of imagine how that lifts up. The place where we acquired this has a long family tradition that this came from the schoolhouse. We can't document that, but it certainly does seem to lend itself to some of the descriptions we have of the early school desks. Now, the Ephrata Academy is built at a rather unusual time in school history in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a very long and complex school history. By 1790, when the first state constitution was created, there was a recognition in that new state constitution that there would be free schools, tax-supported schools for students. And while it was written down in the Constitution in 1790, no one ever acted on it. By 1809, they tried again to stir up interest in a tax-supported free school system. It was sometimes known as the pauper's school system. By that 1809 law, there would be districts, basically a township would be a district, and that in that district, 3 men would be chosen as schoolmen. The schoolmen were responsible for seeing the construction and maintenance of a school building, to see to its upkeep, to see to the teacher who was there, and to also levy taxes. And those taxes would be used to pay the tuition for students who could not pay the tuition on their own. All of these church-supported schools I've been talking about previously, they're all a pay school. You got to pay to go into that school and get yourself an education. And if you can't pay, well, then you just don't go in. And that's why this 1809 law was created, so that what they called poor children could attend school. 1809 is the law, but again, nobody really pays much attention to it. Sometimes they will elect schoolmen, but the schoolmen do nothing. They really kind of don't pay attention to education. In the 1820s, there's a movement to try and get this thing started again, and it doesn't really work out. It's only in 1834 that there's enough push by the public to create Pennsylvania's Free School Act and the system of paying for free schools. Taxes will be generated, and the taxes will be used to support the schools, especially those children who cannot afford to attend school. This map that I'm showing you comes from a wonderful book called Lancaster County's One-Room Schoolhouses, published by lancasterhistory.org. It just came out a few years ago. And what you're seeing is Lancaster County's views on free schools. All those yellow schools, they're happy to accept that free school law and begin to establish taxes and free schools. But all those schools at the top, they are opposed to free schools. Why are they opposed? Well, a couple different reasons. One, it's a threat to their culture. German is the language in Pennsylvania and in this southeastern corner of Pennsylvania at that time, and especially in our region right around here. Well, these new schools will be taught in English. Now, here's where that idea of Ephrata, right from the start, teaching in German and English comes together. You know, we were doing it from the start. Didn't bother us, but it really bothered the neighbors that they may lose their German language if they come into one of these free schools. Some of the people argued that going to school should be your choice. It's free choice. You want to go to school, you can go. You don't want to go to school, you don't have to go to school, they said. And so why should they pay to support people who they really aren't going to take advantage of it? Why should they pay for someone else to do it? And finally, some people had the attitude that you've got to work and work is your education. And if you're not going to work, you're just going to sit in a schoolroom. Well, then you're lazy. You really don't want to work. You just want to go to school. So it's a little unclear here, but I can tell you this says Ephrata Township 1846 is when Ephrata Township finally adopted the Free School Act. So it's passed in 1834. It's another, 13 years until this gets accepted here in Ephrata Township. You see those same townships around us. Elizabeth, 1847, Warwick, 1843, West Earls, 1847. The real holdout in Lancaster County is way at the top. West Cocalico does not accept free schools until 1868, after the Civil War has ended. Ephrata has been running its private pay school academy all along and continues to do that even after the 1846 free schools are adopted in the neighborhood around us. By 1838, just a year after the academy opens, the teacher is a man named Christian Lichtenthaler. And Christian Lichtenthaler puts this advertisement in the Lancaster newspaper for the Ephrata Juvenile Seminary for both sexes. This is also something that really distinguishes Ephrata very early on. Right from the start, they are also committed to having education for both boys and girls. I know you can't read all that tiny little print. I'm going to summarize some things here for you. He says he's going to teach a common English education. And what does that include, according to this advertisement? It includes grammar, geography, plain sewing, and although it doesn't say it, I'm sure arithmetic is in there. Now, Mr. Lichtenthaler is married by the time the academy opens, and his wife actually teaches younger children on the second floor, while he has older children on the first floor. So that's how we can have a sewing teacher there. Mrs. Lichtenthaler is helping to teach plain sewing. That's what you get for your basic education. It's going to cost you $2 for 13 weeks. If you are willing to pay just a little bit more, your children can also learn bookkeeping, mensuration, that's measuring how many gallons in a barrel, how many miles in a yard, or yards in a mile, those kind of things, measuring. You can also learn ornamental sewing if you want for a little extra money. That's 1838. The next year, 1839, he puts another ad in the newspaper, but he's expanded what he's offering here. These are the things that were on that first list, but to all of that, he's going to add composition, defining, history, diction, elocution, and astronomy. If that you want to, you can get a good, well-rounded education from him here in the 1830s. But again, if you want to spend a little more, that ornamental needlework is also an option. But now you can look at some of the arts. You can actually do music, drawing, and painting. That's a wide variety of subjects being taught really out here in still the countryside in 1839. Mr. Lichtenthaler seems to leave around 1840, 1841. I can't quite pin down the exact date, but the next teacher is a man named Joseph Wiggins. Mr. Wiggins comes from Chester County. He is also married. His wife also teaches the younger children upstairs, while he has the older children downstairs. I'm going to talk in a moment just about some of the things he's teaching because he has a little extra too. But I wanted to show you this receipt. Remember, this free school idea started because of paying for the poor children to attend school. Here is a copy of a receipt. The original is held at lancasterhistory.org, a receipt to Joseph Wiggins to reimburse him for the expenses that were incurred for instructing 12 students. This is dated March 5, 1842. It has 12 students named here, it tells how many days they attended and how much the rate was each day, and then multiply it out. So how much each student owes. But at the very bottom of the list, and this is what I really find interesting and helpful, he tells us certain things he buys for some of these poor students. For at least two of the students, he buys a geography and atlas book or books. He doesn't give us titles. He just says geography and atlas. He buys quills, and I will say I'm a little surprised because some of these quills are getting 20 and 30 quills per student. At the same time, he's buying sheets of paper for those same students. He's buying 12 and 14 sheets of paper for a student who gets 21 quills. For one student, he buys a slate and a pencil. And for a couple of students, and this is what's helpful, he buys Angels reader. It's a series of readers. There's 6 books. Many people are familiar with McGuffey's Reader, a series of 6 books starting with a primer, ABCs, moving on up through the grades. Well, McGuffey is not the only one who has readers like that. Angel has some as well, and he buys the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th book. The total of this whole receipt is $40.3075. And here is that number 3 reader. I'm still trying to track down numbers 5, 1, and 3. 1, 4, and 5 are hard to come by. This I found on the internet, but I'm still having a little trouble tracking down some of the others in the series. But we can say here is the reader book that was used in the Academy, at least by Mr. Wiggins. Mr. Wiggins puts out this wonderful ad in 1842 to describe this school he's teaching at, the Ephrata Academy for Males and Females. He says the above institution is situated in one of the most healthful and moral sections of Lancaster County. Isn't that good to know? We're living in a good place. And he says the instruction comprises all the various branches of an English education at prices suited for the times. A few more pupils can be accommodated with boarding with the principal and several respectable families. So we know that there are students coming from a distance. We suspect there may be 1 or 2 from the Philadelphia area and also 1 or 2 from the Baltimore area. And in the church's account book, there is payment to various families in the neighborhood for boarding students. But the one that always catches my attention is you can board with the principal. How'd you like that? Often ask the school students when they visit, how would you like to live with your teacher? And then I look over at the teacher and say, well, I don't think she'd like it either. Mr. Wiggins puts out a couple of different advertisements. He has a beautiful handbill that's printed that is circulated in 1842. And then in October of 1842, he puts this ad in the paper. He says, an examination of the pupils of the Ephrata Academy will take place on Friday next, to which all the friends of education are invited. I'm going to say a little bit more about these examinations for friends of the education after I finish with Mr. Wiggins' story here. We'll come back to this, but this idea of public examinations. But he does note in this little ad that the report speaks very favorably of the manner in which the academy is now conducted under the superintendence of Mr. Wiggins. Sounds like a great teacher, full of all kinds of things to share with his class in a moral and healthful section of the county. Interesting. October 1842. That's what he says. And then this appears. Oh, you probably can't read that. Let me enlarge the important part. Still challenged by this? I'm going to retype it for you. This is the daybook of Justice of the Peace Richard Heitler here in Ephrata. Commonwealth versus Joseph Wiggins. By virtue of a warrant served by Christian Bentz, Esquire, on the complaint of Levi Miller, one of the auditors of the county of Lancaster, the defendant, that's Joseph Wiggins, is brought before me, the Justice of the Peace, on charges for willfully, falsely, and deceitfully obtained from the treasurer of the county about $175 or so for the poor children, and also for poor children's names taught in his school. Mr. Wiggins doesn't seem to be living in a moral section of the county, I think. This is January of 1843. He's brought to the Justice of the Peace and he enters recognizance, which is a bond, think of it sort of like bail, of $500. And his friend, Judge Jacob Hipschman, who lives just on the edge of Ephrata here, he also, I can't quite tell, we're still debating what this means. Does he put up $500 or is he just guaranteeing the $500? We're not exactly sure. Below this, in that original page, there's some discussion about both ensuring that both Mr. Wiggins and Judge Hipschman show up and guarantee they will pay the fee. However, at the very bottom of that page is this entry by the Justice of the Peace. Defendant escaped before reconnaissance acknowledged. So Joseph Wiggins, while he may have been liked, was cheating the county out of money for poor children and took off without paying the bill. Not a good example for his students. And in fact, let me go back to George Barr and his description of what's going on here. I just love George Barr is a student, as I said in that first class, but he wrote his memories about 50 years later as an elderly man. And he says, the school under Mr. Wiggins prospered well. He was liked by parents and pupils, and the family, and the fame and reputation of the Ephrata Academy was extending all around. The principal of the school was coining money with prospect of future success very bright. But alas, in an evil hour, his integrity gave way to the tempter, and his departure from the scene of his labors was abrupt and inglorious. All were astonished, some were indignant, while still more pitied and deplored the frailty of poor human nature. He ends by saying, let us gently and charitably draw the veil of oblivion over an episode which is only painful to recall. Probably the very next teacher after Mr. Wiggins leaves is a man named McElroy, George McElroy. And here's where I want to come back to the idea of public exams. It seems to be a tradition. We find these published in the newspaper all throughout the county, where schools will set aside a day when the school, call them board of directors, sponsors, parents, curious people, neighbors, can come in and watch all the students go through all of their tests publicly. Here's an ad from Mr. McElroy's taking over. And this is just a few months after Joseph Wiggins disappears. Wiggins, that Justice of the Peace docket is January 1863. This is June of 1863. And it says, In following the forwarding sketch of the examination of the pupils of the Ephrata Academy on this day, under the superintendence of Mr. George McElroy, the committee takes the occasion to acquaint those who feel an interest in feel an interest in the prosperity of this institution and of the friendly to education generally, that Mr. McElroy, who has charge of the mail department in this worthy of states, his ability is evident by the advancement made by the pupils in different branches taught by him, which we had the satisfaction of witnessing today. The progress made by the scholars generally indicates that he zealously and industrially applies himself to his vocation and has the pleasure to know that his efforts are not in vain. Pretty high praise for someone who's only been there for a couple of months. Oh, there's more. It says the female department, let's not let the ladies out, the female department is very justly entitled to the same patronage, being conducted with as much ability, and the advancement made by the pupils very credible to the lady having charge thereof. I have no idea who the lady is. We're still in a time in the 1840s and 50s here when women are not getting all the credit they deserve. And then it goes on to explain the program of how the examinations work. I put a summary of that up here on the board for you. So let's attend the examinations of the students in the Ephrata Academy here in June 1843. We're going to start by having the scholars meet at 8:30 o'clock and march in procession into the room. We will follow that with a call to order, some singing, and a prayer. Then there will be an address on our country. Following that, there will be exercises in geometrical problems, algebra, surveying, and mensuration. This is done by grade. So first we're going to hear from the first graders, then we're going to hear from all the second graders, then we're going to hear from the third graders, then we're going to hear from the fourth graders, on through each of these types of lessons. And then we're going to finally adjourn at 11 o'clock. That's a pretty full morning. But the day's not over. Because in the afternoon, there are exercises starting at 1 o'clock. We have to have exercises in English grammar, in geography. I have a spelling mistake there. Yes, I see it. I see it. I see it. It says grandpa. I see it, Sue. Geography, composition, reading. We have exercises in speeches, dialogues, and recitations. I'm also missing a comma, I know. Then we have an address on the triumph of liberty. There's remarks by Reverend Daniel Ryan Hertz, who's the local minister. We've got some general remarks by the teacher. We have to close with some more singing and a prayer, and the day ends at 4 o'clock. Sounds like a pretty intense day to me. But that's the public exercises displayed for the students. I've been putting in a few old pictures here we have of the Ephrata Academy. Again, can't tell you an exact date of this one, but it does come from a souvenir card. And I'll mention those souvenir cards near the end here. Probably 1920s, 19 teens, maybe teens, 20s. Sometime, probably in working on this, I think I can narrow it down to sometime between 1855 and 1857, Ephrata stops becoming a paid subscription school and becomes a public school. The township of Ephrata, the Ephrata school district at the time, begins to rent out buildings, not necessarily all of them schoolhouses. Some of them, sometimes in some areas, they're renting out old stores. They're renting out old buildings that aren't being used at the time and converting them into schools. Ephrata Township is fortunate. They're getting this beautiful, handsome schoolhouse that was built in 1837, and it becomes a public school. No more paying by the lesson or by the day. And this man, John J. Yeager, is the most identified teacher with the Ephrata Academy in the last half of the 1800s. Mr. Yeager was trained pretty much with attending public schools, and one summer at the Millersville Normal Academy, that's what's now Millersville University, the Millersville Teacher School. He had one summer there. And then, you know what he learned in school himself. He began teaching over in West Earl Township, taught there for a few years, but in 1856, the fall of 56, he begins to teach in the Ephrata Academy. He continues to teach in the Ephrata Academy until 1881. He's teaching in that classroom for 23 years. There is a hint in the newspaper that there was some problem that caused him to leave, but I have yet to find the real details on that story. He does leave the Ephrata Academy for a while. He teaches at Moeller Church, at Moeller School, and eventually he winds up back in the Ephrata area teaching at Lincoln, at the Lincoln School, until he retires, having taught school for 45 years. Different teachers are using the academy building. I don't have a full complete list of all their names, but I can tell you this is one of the last two teachers. This is Annie Moeller. And Annie Moeller is teaching, and I'm sure I can be corrected on this, but roughly 1900-ish until about the 19 teens. This is she with her class at the Ephrata Academy in 1909. Following her is the last Ephrata Academy teacher. And oh, here's the souvenir cards. I mentioned these a few moments ago, the souvenir cards. These were being published in the early 1900s. And it's sort of a little souvenir that teachers could get to give to their students. And inside is a roll of all the students who are being taught in that particular year. There's a different souvenir for each year, listing the teacher inside and the students inside. The last teacher is a woman named Bertha Miller, and Bertha Miller is teaching until the academy closes as a public school in 1926. So 1837 to 1926 is the active use of the Ephrata Academy as a schoolhouse, with, I'm going to add a footnote, but it's going to take me a moment to get to the footnote. Probably about the time of the closing of the school, I can't say for certain, but I can tell you this is 1937. This is the back of the school. We're coming out of the Depression. School has not been used for much of any kind of education or really anything else. One of the last members told me that for a summer or two, and this is probably, I'm guessing, the 20s, maybe the very earliest of 30s, his cousin, also a member of the church at Ephrata, used the schoolhouse as a little lunch stop. And he said vegetable soup was always on the menu. Here's the front of the building in 1937. The only thing you can say compared to the back is that the windows are open. And there is, in this 1937, a broom sticking in the front yard. I know it's blurry here, but it says, I've forgotten the first initial, C something Auker, broom maker. And he's a broom maker who's using the schoolhouse as his workshop. In 1941, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania acquired the historic site. And the building was really not used for much of anything but storage in the earliest years of restoration, beginning in 1941. The architect in charge of restoration, a man named G. Edwin Brumbaugh, used this building to keep a lot of his better salvaged items. Brumbaugh would collect windows and door latches and doors and shelves and benches and put them in this building with a label on. He also had used the building for storage for wood, especially some of the specialty woods that he would use during the restoration. It wasn't until 1968, when almost every other building on the site was restored, that work began on the restoration of this building. This photograph comes from the Ephrata Review, as you see, from 1968. And you can see the activity going on right out the front door there, the boards and the like. In March of 1969, there is an announcement in the Ephrata Review that the building has been completed with restoration and is now open for use. And here's where I come back to my little footnote. It is an active school today. It may have looked like this in the past, but it looks like this today. And we use it for school programs all the time. Students love to attend the one-room schoolhouse. And I think one of our great teachers is listening. Joan, I think I saw your name. Thank you for all the work you do in the building to greet all of those great kids who come to visit us each year at the Ephrata Academy. Thank you, everybody, for your patience in listening. This was a real fast sweep through the Academy and education at Ephrata, and we could spend time on more of these, but you may have some questions right now. So I'll do my best to try and answer those for you.
That was very good, Michael. Thank you very much. I had typed in the chat. We used to go on vacation with our elementary school principal's family. And when my son was in elementary school and he was complaining about his principal, I told him this. He was absolutely appalled. Absolutely appalled. You did what? Oh. So if anyone has any questions, if you just stick them in the chat there, we will go through that with Michael. Everybody seemed, Sharon and Miriam, thank you, Michael, another great presentation. I think it's one of the most overlooked buildings on the site. Visitors seldom get over there, and it's nice to shed a little more light on it with the, do you want to talk about the autograph book at all?
Yeah, well, and I saw, well, let me, yeah, I saw somebody pop up. Do we have a list of students who attended? Not really. George Barr, that person who was in that first class in 1837, he attempts to make a list of the students he remembers from 50 years ago. And it's pretty representative of the names of the people living in the neighborhood. We've got those souvenir books from the 19 teens and the early 20s probably, that have registers in. But during much of the time of the last half of the 1900s, when it was a public school, those are all public school records. And so we're going to have to go back into the Ephrata School District archives, if they have such a thing, that may stretch back there. So our you know, and we occasionally will meet people who will say, my grandmother, my great aunt, my great great cousin went to that schoolhouse, but I'm afraid we don't have anything complete.
Somebody else wants to know, let's see. Dorothy King, Dorothy, hi. May have missed this, but you mentioned that the children had art and music, but did any theater?
I don't see any reference to theater, and I'm really not sure what kind of art or music they're even getting. One thing I forgot to mention, it is Lichtenthaler, the first teacher, who talks about art and music being available. one of the longer advertisements that Joseph Wiggins puts out, that next teacher, he doesn't mention art, music, painting. He doesn't mention needlework. He doesn't mention any of that sort of stuff. He would be appealing to the teachers of today, because what he substitutes in place of all of those things is, and I take this from his advertisement, natural philosophy, which we would call like earth science, astronomy, algebra, surveying, geometry, trigonometry, and chemistry. So Mr. Wiggins is a science person, not an art person.
Let's see, what else we got here?
I often ask the students if they think he actually could teach all of those things. Remember, this is a pay school, so the number of students you have attending reflects in your salary. More students, more money.
Joan says she took notes to be even more knowledgeable.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Joan. There's so much to be said. Another area is discipline. And I will say that, again, George Barr, who attended that earlier school with Mr. Lichtenthaler, says that Mr. Lichtenthaler has an entire list of rules to follow, and he is very strict. And he says Mr. Wiggins is not near as strict. And in fact, on nice days, Mr. Wiggins takes the school out for recess in that cool grove. And while he sits there and reads a book, they get to play in the coolness of the trees.
I would just, Shelby has been asking about the cemeteries, and rather than type out an answer, I will do a little plug. She's asking if that's going to be a topic for an upcoming virtual academy, but I will just say that we have 2 Sundays in October where we will be doing tours of the cemetery. So check the website, 23rd and
Right.
31st. Is that right?
Yeah, 30th, 23rd and 30th.
23rd and 30th.
They're Sunday
So,
afternoons.
at
Yes.
2 o'clock. So
and I've been working a lot of time on putting together some stories there that are not just simple biographies, but some interesting stories about people and the cemetery itself and gravestones.
Carrie says, according to the donor, the clock
Oh.
hung in the school during the tenure of John Yeager.
The clock came in during the tenure of Yeager? Is that what you're saying, Carrie?
Carrie, you can unmute yourself to answer.
The donor of the clock said it hung in the school when her grandfather was the teacher, John
yeah.
Yeager.
Right. The note in the day book is from whatever I said is that Hall is painted for the dials, but there's also several notes in the day books about constant repairs for that clock. And I suspect it may have been there until it was moved to the 3rd floor of the Sarin by Clarence Joseph Zerfus in probably the early 20th century.
It was Michael. It was a small clock that hung on the wall in the front of the.
The small one.
Not the tower clock.
Not the tower. Okay, I thought you meant the tower. Yeah, okay, the small one. Yeah, I wonder if that really goes back to 1837, but it makes sense to me that it may have come with like public school.
And then we have a question, is this Marietta, I think, how about the Ephrata story by Ira S. Frank, who wrote about the academy, which he attended, started in 1901.
Right, and there's all kinds of sources of stories about going to that school. I just try to sort of pick out some highlights of things here, but that's another great one to recommend. Thank you, Marietta, for pointing that out, the Ira, yes.
Let's see. Did the academy go beyond 8th grade?
I don't think so. again, once it turns into a public school, it's a little cloudy if they're using both floors. Those last two teachers I mentioned, um, Annie Moeller and Bertha Miller, are probably only using the first floor. Um, but I do think that at least early on in the public school era, there may have been some teachers on the second floor. Again, names, dates, we don't have exact lists, things there, but I don't think anything really went beyond 8th grade in that building. Ephrata by the 1870s, 1880s really had a pretty well established school system to move on to a higher school.
Were the times for the school the same as the day that the others came to observe? Did that happen during the regular school hours? What were the regular school hours?
Right. So best we can tell, sort of a standard, at least this is again, pre-public school era, still the private pay academy school. School seems to start probably about 8:30 in the morning. George Barr specifically says they have lunch from 11 to 1. And when I tell that to the school students, they're all excited to have a 2-hour lunch. And then I say to them, well, what could you do in those 2 hours? Well, they come up with all sorts of games and things they could do. But I say, but it's your lunchtime. Where did you come from and how did you get here? You didn't come on the bus. That didn't exist. Most students lived within a mile of the schoolhouse, and so many of them went home for school, which is why they had that long school period.
You mean lunch?
Lunch period, yes, lunch period. And then they resumed lessons around 1 o'clock and seemed to go to about 3 or 3:30. So the length of the day is similar to what we're even accustomed to today, except for that giant chunk of time in the middle of the day that, in fact, one of the students told me recently that because of having to reschedule all the classes to compensate for COVID makeup classes, some places only have 15 or 20 minutes for lunch.
If they get a lunch, both of my kids, because they had labs for science, didn't even get a lunch in high school
Yeah.
for a couple of years. They were mighty hungry when they got home. All right, and don't see anything else popping up. Thank you, everybody, for joining
Yes,
us.
thank you. Thank you so much.
A couple of little announcements. The next virtual academy will be held on October 13th. It's not a Friday, so that's a good thing in October. Upcoming events, we have the Early Times chapter of the Pontiac Oakland Car Club coming to the site this weekend. It's their annual meeting finale, and they do a little car show just amongst themselves. So probably be about 35 Pontiacs from 1926 to 1954 that'll be there. They'd love to see people and talk, and there's no charge for the car show. There will be the regular admission fees to tour the site. If you're a member, of course, you are welcome to tour the site anytime with no charge, except sometimes during special events. There's a charge depending on what the special event is. Coming up in October 15th, we're very excited about Amazing Architecture Day. We will have demonstrations of 18th century building techniques, a small exhibit on the restoration of the cloister, and limited upstairs tours will also be available. We'll have more information on this and a link to get advance tickets soon on our website. So do keep your eye on our website for information about that. And with that, I don't see anything else coming in. Everybody seems to have enjoyed the program, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So with that, I think we'll call it a
Oh,
night.
yes, apple dumplings. Don't forget the
Oh,
apple dumplings.
Sorry, I forgot all about apple dumplings. Yes, 7 and 8. Where's my calendar? 7 and
7 and
8
8 is apple dumplings, and the ninth,
Yeah.
the chorus will be singing at 2 and 3.
on the 9th. Yes, yes. Forgot all about that. I knew there was something else. So yes, mark your calendars. Come get your apple dumplings. All right, everyone. Oh, we got one new message. Let me just make sure that's nothing we need to. Oh, yep, Sue put in apple dumplings. Yep. All right, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Thank you again for joining us. It's our pleasure and a privilege to see you all here each month. Good night.